check the audio real quick, and then I think we'll be good. All right, there it is. Okay, so I'm going to pull up some reference tonight. I found this place that makes me happy. This is called the Tiger's Nest. What a cool name. And what an interesting place. I saw some images actually that showed apparently there had been a fire and much of this had been destroyed. This looks like, I believe this is after it's been rebuilt. Excuse me. So I thought this would be a fun theme to jump into. I can't guarantee that we're going to stay on this topic because you guys know me. I jump around a little bit. But I think this will be a lot of fun. Alright, so let me pull that up. I'll pull it over to the other screen. Alright. If you have any questions, feel free to jump in on the chat on the YouTube live stream chat there. I would be happy to have the discussion be centered around questions and interests rather than just mad rants. Okay, so maybe we'll start with a number of thumbnails because we have a bunch of images of this place. The angles are pretty similar because it looks like there's a path up to the structures there. So I think our options without a drone are pretty limited on viewing angles, but still there's a little bit of variation between the different photos in our reference. So I'm just gonna block some things in real quick. This is a leaf brush from my foliage pack, but I'm actually just going to use it as a texture brush at this scale because why not? We're wild and unpredictable like that. At least that's what we tell ourselves to feel like we're still young. Okay. Getting some structures kind of blocked in there. I'm going to bring in some warm gray in here. Stone. And I don't want to get too bogged down or stuck with with one particular iteration on this. I'm just going to get it to a readable point, and then we'll move on to another, and that should help us spread out the inspiration and kind of mull over this a little bit. Give us some opportunity to pick out different things about it that are interesting. And then that's where the artistry comes in, right? Is when you're highlighting something that is more interesting to you as you're consuming it for the first time as an artist, and then those are the things that you kind of accentuate, focus the image on in order to share that with your viewing audience. So that's the idea. So looking at the chat. Here, those refs look amazing. Yes, I was, digging for some reference. I was looking at some castles. I was checking out the Teutonic Knights and some of their castles, and then kind of broadened the search to find something else. And this is just such a romantic romanticize. I don't know how to word it. It's like it's such an interesting place. I mean, just the fact that someone built a castle there, you know, thought that would be cool to like, yeah, you know, let's drag all these resources up this precarious path on this mountainside, and build a little fortress for ourselves that will be very difficult to approach, right? Like it's just wild. I guess though the downside to that is when you're painting a place that is itself amazing, and you know, you're trying to capture that beauty and wonder of the place, and it can be a little bit daunting. Okay, we're gonna make that just a little smaller. I'll do these as thumbnails. I'll do another set right behind this. I'm just going to use a kind of just a block-in brush, maybe natural drag. Been having a lot of fun with this one lately, and I'm just going to block in that sky. Go much brighter than that. Well, a little darker as it moves in here. I'll jump over to my smudge brush, blend those in, and then let's see, we got kind of a darker fill behind everything here. So we'll, oops, ended up with the same color as the background, and I'm going to shift this more towards blue so that I'm not you know, competing in the background, you know, bringing those elements too far forward. And then you can shift it again for these foreground elements and actually go darker with it. And grab a little bit of this gray, and we'll bring it up in value. Just brush a little bit in. Get that kind of rock surface, stone surface going on there. And I think that's adequate for that thumbnail, and we'll move on to another one. Okay. Another shot here, this is really interesting. They've got some nice cloud cover. So I'm going to bring this in. Let me shift that over to more of a blue, close to purple. We'll see how that works as a base. Let's shift that a little bit more into this region here. Let's see how we want to approach this. I think I will just blend these together. This is kind of these are kind of clouds that are lower, below our eye level. And I think I'll just bring this sky color in, and then we'll just paint into it, and it does kind of fade into this darker and kind of muted purple, bluish purple gray down here, and we'll work on fading those down. Okay, now do this as a separate layer. We'll start bringing in our mountains here. We kind of peeking up through, and you know, as we always do, and we kind of try to reference. You know, we're showing like that as one line there, but we're kind of breaking that up. Come up here. I think we'll just keep carrying this up because this is going to be more of a background element. We'll paint over that, and then we'll bring in some down here, and I think I'll shift this value a little bit. It's not quite as strong and not quite as contrasty as it comes down. And then of course we can paint behind this as well. We did all that shape in there from the start, so we can just paint that in, and then I'll go up a shade brighter here, a little bit lighter, and bring in like a separate mountain shape coming in there. And then we'll start with our foreground mountain, and this will be warmer tones. At least that's the way the reference image is graded. It seems to me like that's perhaps Photoshop or Lightroom hackery, but we shall forgive because it looks cool. So we're just going to go with it. And if we want to adjust those hues later, that's all good and fine. That is the beauty of digital, just how easy it is to postpone decisions in the process. So do we want to go up and over, break that horizon like this, or do we want to leave it down below so we've got kind of more of a downward shot on this? I like the vertical nature of this, but something about carrying it that high, I don't know, to play with that. But that's something to consider, right? Especially in this thumbnail stage. We might do one like this and then copy it and kind of irreverently undo all this work we did. And I'm kind of seeing some of these harmonies in the rock, these rock lines that kind of converge on our castle here, so I'm going to accentuate that. I think that's pretty cool, especially you got these very strong vertical shapes here, and then these diagonals coming in. So we're going to amp that up to 11. Okay, and I think we can just pin a layer to this since we painted all that rock there. This is the part that I'm talking about. Then if we want to shift some of those hues, we can do that quite a bit more easily at this stage because we don't have to worry about painting through our background there, right? And what's nice about this too is the same thing with these kind of harmonies here that I was talking about. We can bring those harmonies in here as well, quickly with these. Just a stroke here without worrying about going beyond that space into the background or off the edge here. All right, just heading over to the chat. What color profile do you work in Photoshop? I just set my new MacBook and trying Pro Photo RGB. I used to have Photoshop set in Adobe RGB. Exporting files for web has now become a challenge. Yeah, I typically work in RGB, Adobe RGB, and sometimes I will switch to CMYK if for the job that I'm doing, if it's specifically for print. I don't like working in CMYK just because I've gotten more used to how the color relationships are modeled in RGB. But it actually has been beneficial to work in CMYK, just to use a different system and to conceptualize things a little bit differently. I think it's good to do that every now and then, as to not get stuck in one stuck in a rut, as far as how we think about color. As far as converting it, so you're converting it when you save for web. I don't know that I have a great answer for that. It's been a long time since I've played with those settings. Whatever I ended up setting it up for last, which was years ago, ended up being good enough for me, and I kept it there. Though I'm sorry if this is already something you're aware of, but if you go to Save for Web and you go to the Convert to sRGB, you can change the type of profile here. And I think ideally you would want to set up the profile to match whatever you're painting in. For the MacBook, I don't know. I don't know if I could really advise on that because I don't use Mac. I do know that for PC, I've used a color calibration tool, which is just a piece of hardware, and it'll sit on top of your monitor and run a whole bunch of different colors, and it'll meter those colors and adjust your profile to get them accurate. I have not used that in some time, so this monitor is probably out of calibration. But that is another resource that you could look up. I know one's called, I believe, the Spider, and the one that I use is an old one. It's not the most professional version, but I think it's called the Color Monkey or something like that. And I believe it is put out by Pantone. Okay, let's get some of these roofs blocked in here. There's an interesting rhythm to this that I'm going to zoom in to work on. I know at this view it's probably hard for anyone to see who's in the stream here, but I'm just going to take a minute to cut these shapes out and try to get the rhythm of these white buildings here, so that it kind of, well, let me just block it in and then it'll be easier to describe. So what I'm seeing is this kind of jump from here to here, and then here, and then there's actually one more down below. And so I want to accentuate that. I'll actually just leave that up so you can see how I'm approaching this. Let's go here, then there's a big shape here, and this one over here is a little bit brighter. This may be the brightest up here. And then down to here. And these warm up as it moves this way. Whoops, I did all that on that layer. I need to not do that. That's the layer we want right there. Alright, let's do that again. So here. Use a bigger brush here, block it in. And then here, finally. And so we'll start to knock back some of those other areas so that they aren't as bright. Don't distract from what we're trying to do here. We'll bring the roof back in. There's a lot of extra little details, but for this thumbnail stage, not important. But I do want this visual hierarchy set up. Alright, I'm going to hide that. I think part of what makes this stand out is it's got this really interesting and high contrast window shape here. So I want to make sure that that doesn't appear to be the same as the background. I don't want that to jump out as it could read as a pass-through, and that is not what I want. Actually, there's just kind of a bright spot there. Okay, and then I'm going to back up from this so that I'm not getting tunnel vision on it. One last bit there. Alright, so I'll zoom out here. And bring in some of these greens. Just get that color as a baseline. Checking back on the chat. Yeah, the color profiles, if it's an issue for you, like if the colors change when you save them, that can partly be the profile, could also be the compression. So you could try. Well, it's going to change if your color profile is different than your screen. Sorry that that's not particularly helpful. I do wish I knew a little bit more about color profiles. I just know in my experience, and it's been a long time since I played with those, There was a format that worked really well for web, and by worked really well, I mean you were kind of stuck with for web, if I remember correctly. And just getting an accurate translation from what you painted to what you end up with for web, to me was the most important part. And I wish I remember what steps it took to get there. But that being said, I do think that my colors end up being kind of compressed. And I don't know if that's because I'm working in 8-bit, and I should be moving up in the world 16-bit or whatever. It never seemed that important to me. It's never stopped my work. So I never really looked into that. But that could be a contributor. It might be time to pay attention. Okay, I'm gonna do just a little bit of adjustment on how these interact with each other here, and then we'll move on to the next iteration. I think I just want to bump this up just a little bit brighter. And flare the bottom out a little bit. And I could probably stand to do that on all of these shapes. Just flare it out just a little. And we could go with a soft brush. Darken that up as it recedes. Do we want to carry some of this cloud down here so that there's some continuity? And then we could cut it off, so it's kind of moving around these rocks, and then we cut it off here. And that shows that this swings around this way, if we want to do that. Maybe not. Maybe we just carry that straight down, leave it, feeling like it's off in the distance. Alright, and then we could take all of this, group it, and then mask off, wherever we want our boundaries to end up. Let's see if we can go take all that off the top there. Okay, then we'll start in with another one. Alright, here's one that is quite a different angle on it. And as far as the lighting goes, it's a bit more complicated. So start blocking it in. This is brighter and almost in the teal range here. Almost. And this color here. Got these mountains in the background. There's something kind of satisfying about that color combination there. Just really gentle shifts there. Just checking out the chat there. Yeah, 8-bit is my style. Unfortunately, maybe I'm just I don't know. It'd be funny if that's what's guiding everything, and you know, I upgrade my color profile, and then find out that I can't handle it. If all along it was just the color limitation that was my crutch. Maybe. Who knows? So this one, we've got this really kind of midday lighting on this, and it's pretty interesting. You know, some of these other ones, you get that afternoon, you know, golden hour lighting, which is wonderful. You know, the light kind of comes in from the side. You get the, you know, light kind of bouncing off the sky in these really nice warm tones, and then in a just midday lighting, it's all coming down from the top, very harsh. You've got a fill from the blue atmospheric light. But there is something satisfying about that lighting, even though I think it's more difficult to work in, and you know, it's just less dramatic, right? So I think most artists will lean on that dramatic lighting, you know, the evening, early morning or late evening lighting, which is great, and it's great for photography for sure. But there's something about midday lighting that just, to me, it conjures up these just these warm, happy summer feelings, you know, like I think visually it's a little harder to work with, but thematically it's pleasing. Some of this I'm just inventing. You know, the rock face doesn't go up that high in my reference, so we've got to kind of fill that in. But let's see, we've got some blue down here. This gray shifts towards this blue here in the stone. Actually, might even be a little harsher than that, but we'll just leave it here for now. And then there's some warm light that's looks to be reflected light coming up, and so that play off nicely off of the that cool shadow there. Though that might be a little bit intense. Dial it back, Eric. You're going too crazy. Alright, and then we have some a little bit of reds, though I think we might reserve this. I'm going to bring that closer to gray, and then we'll reserve our most red tones for the roofs on these, which we haven't even started painting yet. We should probably block the structure in, huh? So I have it right about. This is really not that well measured. It's right in here. So I'm going to bring a lot of this down in value, so that will give us some room to play with. Yeah, so right here, we're drawing the shadow first, and I'm going to go a little deeper with that shadow, so that we get a nice high contrast on that. Focal point. And then down here, there's, I don't want to go too crazy there, but there's a whole other kind of section of the compound down there. And then I'm going to take some of this green and just go a little more intense with it in here and along this edge here. And dial it back just a skosh. Okay, so now we want to paint in that the actual structure, right? So I'm seeing almost like a pink in the shadow side, which is kind of neat. Bring that in, and there's a little bit. See this? Comes across here, and then we got another little structure there, and all the way down here. There's another one. Excuse me. Now I'm going to do. I'm going to shift this over towards blue, and we'll go a little bit brighter with that. And we'll bring in some of these areas that are still in shadow but are picking up some light from the sky. And up here, there's some interesting. Okay, and then we'll get our bright light, which is appearing warm to me. So yeah, it looks like that's kind of just like direct sunlight there. And we'll start painting that in. Let's see, this whole area up here needs to be adjusted. And then we'll bring in our roof, which we said we would reserve some of these warm tones for. I'm going to zoom in for this so you can actually see it, and I can hopefully get some of these angles marginally correct at this stage. That's going to come up a little higher there. And I'm just going to set my background color as that shadow so that I can just really quickly block in a shadow underneath. I can paint in the roof shape and then get that warm shadow underneath, because you'll have that warm shadow there because you're not getting the blue light to fill in the shadow side, from the atmosphere, but you're getting actually a bounce light, so your direct sunlight bouncing off the rocks and into the shadow area. And I think that this whole thing could be perhaps a little. Well, we can adjust that shape later. It is going to need adjustment here. We'll go with this blue light. So I will have to pause at some point here. My wife had to run one of the kids, excuse me, over to the urgent care. Nothing particularly concerning. He kind of tweaked his wrist, but he will be very tired when they get back. So I'm gonna pause for a minute when they get back and help unload them. Help unload the little people. Okay, we'll get this area blocked in there. And I think this whole thing is wider in actuality. It's gonna come over here. Okay, I am really noodling too much with this, so we're gonna wrap it up. So we'll grab this color here, bring it up in value, and we're going to go warmer. Excuse me, go warm with it for these roofs that are in direct light here. And you catch just a little bit on that corner. That's a nice little touch there, and then up here on top of this roof. And this actually has a stack on top of it, like this. And then this one here as well. Alright, I'm going to zoom out. Pause it there. I will mute myself and go help unload my kids, if in fact they're here. Let me just check that. Oh, no, they're still about a 40-minute drive out, so actually we will just continue then. Okay, so I think we could do a little bit more with that, but I like just how high key all of that is. Let me bring in just a little bit of light here. We'll have that kind of fade off. And one of the things that you're doing when you paint directly like this, you have to think about it when you are approaching it more in the digital manner, as far as like getting in your values before you really start working in color. Then you don't have to worry about this as much. But the point that I want to make here is that wherever you see, these bright, so you've got like a dark green and then a bright green, just start echoing that with your local color for your stone as well. So it's like, okay, we've got this bright green there, and so we're going to bring in some of those bright grays in next to it, and that's just going to imply that light is passing over that area and going across both your foliage and your shadow, or I'm sorry, both your foliage and your stone. And so really the whole point being your shadows or your light, excuse me, will pass through your local colors. So if you have like a sharp transition, here for example, I think is a good example of that, where we need some we need to show what is casting this shadow, and show that it is in fact a shadow and not a shift in the local color. So we'll bring up this stone shadow color here, and some of our green foliage in there, and then our bright foliage on top of it to show that the sun is hitting here, and then this is in shadow, and then that's our cast shadow shape right there. And with any of this, it's good to squint a little bit and to see, okay, how can I adjust this and view it all as one composition and not just as its individual parts. And here's an example here where we have this, I have this shadow here, and I've got this bright green, implying that that foliage is in light, but I don't have any of the grays brightened up. So that's really sending the wrong message there. It's saying that that's just a brighter local color, whereas when we bring that second value in next to it, then it's going to show, okay, these are lit forms, that there's a change in the local color that carries through. Hearing that come out of my mouth didn't make sense. There's a change in the light that carries through across the form regardless of the local color underneath it. That's a more accurate way of describing that. Okay, and kind of like what's going on there, but there's like a nice opportunity to have some more of these diagonals that cut in and point down towards our focal point. So that's what I'm going to do. All right, that's I'd say good enough for now. I do want to kind of figure out what's happening in this space here, because it's not very effective as a thumbnail if we don't actually fill in the space that would be required, when we decide on our crop if we're going with a vertical composition or a landscape. If we have like a L shape, you know, but we don't figure out the rest of this, then that's a problem that we're going to have to solve later. So we may as well address it now, so that we can make a more informed decision up front about which thumbnail we prefer. And I think I'm just going to kind of homogenize that, bring it all down to nothing, down to a kind of a flat color. I'm going to have the rock face kind of emerging out of that darker tone there. Okay, and then we can do the same thing with all of this. Group it all, go to our mask, and we'll, if you hold shift, I held caps lock instead of shift, then you can get your nice clean vertical and horizontal lines and get your composition you get the edges of your frame figured out. I actually kind of like it, you know, going off into nothing there. You know, we talked about you know, working against that to actually determine the framing of it. But I enjoyed that, you know, what that did for us in terms of its composition. So that's something to think about. You know, when I come back to these, you can hide the mask, which is the nice thing about doing it as a mask rather than just erasing. Because then you can come back and say, okay, I actually really did like that, you know, one little bit that was going on there. Okay. I'm going to do this really quickly just because we can. And that is just do a color balance on this. I'm going to crop out the rest of the background so we're not adjusting anything else. But zoom in and run a color balance on it, because I think we can squeeze just a little bit more out of it. I don't want to go too crazy with those midtones quite yet until we get until we play with our shadows and highlights. And typically when I do this, you know, I want to figure out whether I've got a warm or cool cast. That would be preferable for the image. But then I generally try to balance white to be pretty close to white. And, you know, you don't have to do that. You can get an image that's lit with, you know, extreme, lights that are, you know, just deep red or cyan or whatever. And you can get an interesting effect that way. But certainly when we're looking at like daylight or natural lighting conditions, sometimes a good white balance is goes a long way. Okay. do we want to take another hack at this? Do another version of it. There's just so many. I'll pull these references back over because there's just so many interesting nuances. Even though, like I said earlier, there's a lot of similarity in the angle, because you can only really photograph it from the path, leading up to it. But just in terms of, this is much warmer, richer colors here. They probably boosted the greens. In this one you get that nice soft diffuse lighting, and actually you can see this is at a different stage in the development of the castle. That may have been, I had mentioned that there was a fire here. I don't know if that preceded it or was while it was under reconstruction. But you can just see in the different ways that, whether it's the way the photographer is adjusting the images or the camera that they're using, because all digital cameras will analyze light differently. So there's different lighting conditions, but then there's also how the camera interprets the data off the sensor. If you don't know, if you're not familiar with photography, for digital photography, color is reconstructed. It's not just like a straight what you see is what you get. There's different methods to reconstruct color depending on the camera body that you have. And so between the different brands, Sony, Nikon, Canon, there's different methods. And I'm not a big camera buff. Had to study it for a little bit for some work projects. But anyway, there's a lot of interesting little things like that I had not realized. Looking at it from the outside, like, okay, there's a whole method and technologies behind how light and color is interpreted. It's not just what you see is what you get. So anyway, between all of those different nuances, the actual lighting conditions of the day, and then the cameras being used, you get a very different effect, and it's really there's a lot of different possibilities with it. This one is really nice as far as just the deep contrast on it. And again, what I was talking about with these lines here that just seem to converge on the castle. So you get these verticals from just looks like erosion. The water's carrying down those minerals in these verticals, and then you get these diagonals that come in the rock structure, even here, leading up, and then of course you have the path leading up, so everything kind of converges there. Even these mountains here, lends itself to a very nice composition. This is nice as well here. This diagonal. Oops. All right, so I'm going to probably do a few more thumbnails based on those, and I'm just going to check the chat real quick here. So I saw someone use image auto tone and then auto color and auto contrast yesterday to change the color grading. Very interesting. Looks like HDR and contrast added. Yeah, that would be an interesting approach. In Lightroom, there's very simple tools to get your white balance adjusted. You can color pick a region and say this is supposed to be balanced to a true white, and then it will adjust it. And you know, you could cheat that a little bit too. You know, color pick from something that's not quite white. And that is another area where like knowing CMYK is useful when you're working with you know, that white balance in Lightroom. But yeah, having something just quick and easy. You know, Photoshop is not translated well for me. If there is a feature, I would love to know about it, to just get a quick white balance and adjust from there. But that sounds like an interesting technique. I'll have to look that up. Looks like HDR. Okay, so let's move on to a few of these other compositions here. Let's see, this one is a almost purple hue to it in the stone, and there's a lot of these erosion marks, which are pretty cool. So we'll block those in. Looks like it's graded a little bit, like there's a gradient that was brought in from this side. Whether that's an actual lighting condition or not, I'm not really sure. And then there's stone texture here. Let me see if I can get a different brush that might handle that a little more easily. I actually do have some texture brushes that I don't. It's been a long time since I've used them. Yeah, right here, these rocks. I had set these up. I had used them for different projects, but I just get more used to painting things in a little more manually, and these kind of fell by the wayside. But we'll try it out. Get them in here. I want something that is going to give me more interesting lines, so I actually might go with under splatter grunge foliage pattern wild brushes. So wild brushes have some interesting ones in here, and these have a nice variance in the thickness of the brush. Depends how hard you push and the angle. So the twist has a lot to do with it. It's a really fun brush to work with. I'll zoom in so you can see what's going on here. This is not one that I've released yet, though I do have plans to do that. But I'm sure I've shown this before. It's like with a twist and a push, you can widen the stroke, and the light pressure, you just get this nice line here. But a quick turn or something, you get these interesting variations there. So this might be a good one for these rocks, even though I intended it more for foliage and line work. If I have to bring in these rock striations here, but be able to cut in some deeper, thicker shadow shapes. This is not half bad. I think I would prefer something that's a little more solid, like to be able to fill that in solidly without all of that texture on the side. But I don't feel like making a new brush tonight. Alright, let me zoom out a little bit here so we're looking at the whole composition. And this is a interesting part of live streaming with painting, is that all of this stuff I would be doing pretty much at as zoomed out as possible, because at this stage I'm thinking about composition. So I will be zooming out on this to get a better read on it, but it's just not that interesting to watch. When everything's so tiny, you can't really see what's going on. All right. Looking back at the chat here. Image, autotone. The artist that showed it was Dom Lay, layered painter on Instagram. I will have to check that out. The name doesn't ring a bell, but you know, sometimes you see their work and you recognize the artist. Okay, I'm gonna probably paint below all of this. Go with this. Get some of these grays, and I think I need to warm them up a little bit. Shift over towards the oranges. I will check out that technique when we get to it at this on this thumbnail. We'll see if we can find those settings and give that a try. Though I don't want to spend too much time. If I get lost, you know, that's probably just some research I'll have to do on my own. You know, after the stream. Okay, and pretty soon here I'm going to need to zoom out to see where my shapes need to come in. Here. It really would be the smart thing to do to bring in the shapes of my focal point, because otherwise all of this kind of noodling around will just be could just be wasted time if we have to move things. A little bit there. And here, let's see about see how our distribution of these shapes is working. So we may want to adjust it just to make it a little more interesting. You know, we're studying each of these, you know, different angles on this, or different references of the same image, or the same location. But pretty soon, you know, you start getting to the point where you want to make some informed decisions about how we want to depict this. You know, do we want to go absolutely crazy and do something completely different? You know, just using this as a base to work off of? Do we want to do a faithful rendition of one of the images, or, you know, do we want to idealize this? You know, adjust it so it's even more ideal than what we're seeing in these images, which I think would be a challenge. These are pretty, it's pretty inspiring place. Bring in these roof shadows here, and then we'll do our roof color. Let's see, this is a little more, has more of a slope to it. You know, trying to keep that diagonal flow of the composition there. And there's some green in there I'm going to bring in. I think my fan picks up a lot of noise here. My PC fan. One of these days I will have to adjust my setup so that it's better sound and all that good stuff. Though I don't want to get too crazy on the YouTube side of things. You know, I want to stay focused on the painting and the community, you know, aspect of it. You know, if increasing the quality, audio quality, that sort of thing, if that's a deal breaker for anyone watching, then you know that's certainly something I'll look into and see if we can reasonably address. You know, but I think that the things that are most important to me in doing this is one, that it is maintains the creativity, the fluid nature of it, where you know there's a lot we can do, and I was thinking about this in terms of, you know, community building and that sort of thing. Like, I want to see this be something that, you know, really benefits people, and that there's a lot of interaction, able to, you know, talk with each other. The difficulty with that, or I would say the downside, you know, you see a lot of what is required to do that is, you know, certain commitments and challenges, and you know, more of the kind of what would you call it? Not marketing, but yeah, maybe marketing. You know, it's these things that give you a reason to show up, and that's certainly important. But I want to make sure that I'm focusing on the work and the growth over, I mean, the growth, artistic growth over the, you know, channel growth, if that makes sense. the more I get into it, the more I realize how much work YouTubers put in. It's more or less, getting into building your own TV station. If that's how deep you want to get into it. And I guess what I'm saying is that that's not that's not how deep I want to get into it. But I think whatever could be reasonably improved and could reasonably make the end user, the listener, experience to be as valuable as possible. That would be desirable. I think that's where I'd like to go with it. I see some comments there in the chat. Let me just check that. Oh, yeah, no background music. Yeah, that's a good point. I was never really bothered with it. Partly I don't even really typically work with music. I find there are different modes that you can be in. Music for me is when I want to shut my brain off and do mainly rendering work is work that when you're first getting into it, getting into painting, rendering is something you have to focus on, and then eventually it becomes something that is more or less automatic. And so I find that when I'm getting into rendering, I'm just putting light, casting shadows and shading things, all that kind of stuff. That's something where I can kind of tune out, listen to some music, and still be productive. But for design work, I would say even what we're doing here to some degree there's a little bit of rendering here because I'm just trying to get these leaves to look right, or to look like a tree and not like a slug hanging off the mountain. But when it comes to designing, where you're trying to solve visual problems and make this an interesting image, not because the lighting feels right, but because the positioning of everything is interesting, and there's something about whether it's I would say maybe color comes a little later for me, but the composition, that the distribution of the space and that sort of thing, that's where I really got to think. And having music on in those stages, it just gives me a headache. I don't like it. That's part of the reason for that. And I would agree, when I watch other YouTubers, sometimes you can get into the music, and sometimes it's just, they're just into something that's not your jam, and you can't make yourself like something. If a certain style of music really bothers you, then sometimes it can really be obnoxious. All right, let's get some of this. Some of these diagonals worked out in a different way. I've got these lines, these shadow, or these cut lines in the rock coming down to it, but I like the idea of the foliage, following those cues as well. So they're coming in. And this is a different image than what we were looking at earlier, but we could also utilize that same idea there. Bring these in. Just a point in here, and I think we'll just find a decent, I don't know if we want to flip those, so we'll go darker or lighter here, darker down here. I don't know what I prefer. All right, we'll bring in some of these yellows and reds and so forth in here. Make sure I'm looking at the right reference here. Bring in some reds. Oh, really more of a orange. Well, that actually doesn't go all the way across. These are two different buildings, or two different sections of the building that don't quite, they don't have that same treatment with the orange there. We'll bring in some really brighter yellows there. A couple of these areas. That's too much contrast there. And there is some cool some cool light for these white walls up here. You might exaggerate that just a little bit here. Okay, and I think some of this needs to have little pops of color in the stone here. I just find this is kind of a difficult color to reproduce. This sandy tan. You can get it, you know, too yellow, too salmon. Takes a little fiddling to get it dialed in. But you can see just how much life that adds, you know, to have that warm next to the cool grays and the cool you know, off-white there. Adds just a little bit. And I'm actually going to knock it back down here so that we're kind of drawing everything into that area. And I think we need to add some of these streaks. It warms here. There's like these little erosion lines going up that way. Just a few, just little flecks of it here. But we want to be careful not to go, not to distract, but to actually utilize that to lead the eye. Okay, I'm going to go on top of all this and just paint some of these dark streaks coming down. And what brush do I want to use for this? Maybe this guy. Seems like that's the one. We'll go to multiply. Got a whole bunch of it in here. And we'll have to dial this back, of course, so that it's not completely down to black in that area. But I'm spending way too much time on this. This one thumbnail. And I think we should I'm going to smudge some of that. Bring some of this over. Smudge that down. Okay, and there's also some bright streaks, you know, more kind of mineral deposits over the rocks that are just streaking straight up and down. I'm gonna step back now. That was really all that helpful right there. Might do a few little pitted areas for these to fall into. Okay. So let's do those bright regions. And again, that's kind of this little gray here. I'm tempted to just do a selection mask, but I think we might be able to, if we don't crash the crash Photoshop, we could do this with the blend if option on the layer. And there's like this shape in here that's really interesting on the reference that I want to try to emulate. Yeah, it's getting too smudgy. So I erase away at it a little bit. And I'll use my selection tool here and pull some pieces out. Or you can just move them. Sometimes that's a nice way to work with rocks. Get some randomness by making a selection somewhere and moving it elsewhere. Keep it in the same general area. Okay, now I'm gonna pin that layer, make a selection on that color, and shift it over. Both hue, saturation, and I'm going to switch this to the nasty square because that's a good brush for blending. And then we'll, with that layer clipped, we will start shifting those colors. And if we want to go brighter, of course we can do that. I think we're probably not going to, because we don't want to compete with what's there, for the focal point. But let's see the usefulness of that technique right there. And I guess we're getting relatively close to the color portion, so we could try out that auto tone technique. Auto tune. Alright, and just having a look at comparing my reference here. I think I want to bring the value up, you know, the contrast between the structure and the stone. It's really interesting how just how different these are. You know, just the whether it's a different type of stone or just the painting that they did to it. It just the amount of work to have this thing exist standing apart from its environment just seems astronomical. You know, think about, well, depending on the climate, like you would think that, you know, there were images of this, you know, covered in snow. It's like, well, okay, you got to bring firewood up to this place or heat it somehow, you know, and it doesn't sound like a fun job. Okay, so bright. So see, we actually can go quite a bit higher with that, and I will just set this to. I guess we'll set it to normal. We'll paint this in, and at the risk of at the risk of Photoshop crashing, we're gonna do a blend F. So then take this and we'll just move it a little higher in the hierarchy there. I think the crashing has tended to happen when I drag it. But if I just tap, should be okay. All right. So we get a little bit of brighter value there. Okay, adjust that just a little bit more. Oh, there's my wife. I need to go help with the kids. So I'm going to mute myself, and I will be back. Okay. Children have been put in bed, back from the hospital, in good spirits, so all good there. So actually this is one of the images that I'd like to tone, so let's we'll group all this stuff first. So that's that guy. I don't know, I like having some of that vertical space there. Okay. So this one up here, so that was the first one. So let's try that. You said image. Image, auto tone, and then you said auto contrast, auto color, auto contrast. And we'll just step back so we have that. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. I mean, it gives you a quick gives you new new options really quickly. I wonder if the order gives you something different. So if you go to auto contrast, auto color, auto tone, yeah, you gotta end up with a different result. It's interesting. I'm going to clean this one up just a little bit, just because let's see which image I actually used as a reference for that one. I'm looking at these and I don't know. That bad, huh? So far from the reference that I don't even know which one was my reference. All right, well, I think I see which one it is, but I had taken quite some liberties with it, which is fine. Anyway, I'll do a new layer here, and we'll start cleaning this up just a little bit. I'm going to keep the core characteristics of this. I was trying to keep this loose, and I think that's still important. So we'll clean this up hopefully without losing that the gestural quality of it. Some of these I think are just a matter of, here bringing in some brighter light and fading it down, getting the essence of what was going on there in the reference. But then refining it a little bit, so it's a soft transition, you know, into like a hard edge here, and so that be perhaps a better use of that shift in color there. You know. Let's see what else. Here, this is kind of like a V shape. And this. Again with the diagonal coming in like that. Let's see, this we can shift that hue, I think. Go a little darker with it. Darker still. And even darker, we'll go in here. Get some of these shapes to read a little more cleanly. You know what's interesting about this image is the light and shadow side of these. Well, even there's so many like dappled clouds up there. So actually, we'll bring those in. Yeah, so there's these clouds coming in like. Like so. And of course they're going to kind of tighten up as they go towards the horizon. Yeah, there's these really broken cloud patterns, and that's casting this light, these shadows onto the subject that have these nice little, soft variations. It's really pretty interesting. And then we're going to bring in a smudge brush to play with these clouds a bit. Might have been better off to start with the smudge brush for this, because you get that nice broken edge. Whereas a lot of what I painted in there I'll probably unpaint, paint out. And I'll get back to the chat once I've wrapped up this portion of the smudging. Okay, I think we need to break this up as well, just to show the cloud pattern there. And do we want this to carry up above? That's fine, I guess. I don't want to get too carried away with it. And I'm just going to grab some of these portions and erase them so that our clouds are just a little bit cleaner. They are pretty rough. The muddier they get, the less it sells the realism of it, you know. It's kind of broken off into these, you know, it's not like a fog up in the sky, it's these broken shapes. But anyway, let me zoom out to make sure that it's reading on a whole. Okay, and then we'll come back in. And bring in some of that light that I was talking about. So, you know, this white area here, actually some of these are really quite bright, and there is a little bit of, must be, you know, humid in the image, because there's kind of a glow to that white in there. And then this darkens up. We'll just fade that in there, and then fade to a lighter value on this like lower corner here. Okay, similar thing going on in some of these other areas. But I think we need to simplify and just wrap up this portion. Here, these windows there. It's such an interesting arrangement and patterning on this. You know, just the, you know, that red stripe. You know, when you look at it more closely, there's these little wedges. Let me zoom in actually. Show. There's little there's windows here, and then there's like these little marks in between each one. And that's just really, I think, aesthetically pleasing. You know. That's why we're here. Soft light there. I was talking about some of the, the soft light from those clouds. So we're gonna play with that a little bit here. Some of this needs to be shifted towards blue. Maybe somewhere in there. Let's see, a little shape here. And in here, this is almost purple in that region. So we'll bring in some of that surrounding color there. And that light information, or the color in the light, is information. It tells you what direction that plane is facing. So it's not insignificant. It would pick up light from its surroundings, and so whether that's picking up light from the sky, the atmosphere, like the blue sky, or whether it's picking up light from directly from the sun, make a difference to that plane what color cast it's picking up. It's pretty interesting here. I can't tell if this is like temporary roof or something, because it has this really strange shifted color on the roof, and then the other side is like a muted blue-gray here. It looks almost like a metal roof, but I think that combination in color is really, to me, pretty aesthetically pleasing. Those two colors side by side. I want to pick up a little bit of that and bring it up here. And I think we'll start to bring it into some of these warm tones there. I just like it. I like that color. Sometimes you like a color and you just want to see it put to good use. Alright, oh yeah, I said I was going to get back to the chat here. It's a lot of work building up a YouTube channel. Definitely need more viewers on this one. The content is solid. You just need more eyes. I appreciate that. That's very kind. Yeah. I think the delivery could be more entertaining, but I'll just be honest and say that I have no desire to be an entertainer. So that kind of falls flat right there, right? And I had a thought a while back to do a YouTube channel themed on getting the artistic principles out quickly. Because I would look for content and not really be able to find something that gave me what it promised in a timely manner. I know that sounds kind of crazy to be in. We're in this century where we can we have all this information at our fingertips, and we just want it fast. We want the answer now. And so I'm aware of that. But I would say there are times when you're working and there's something you're looking for, or something specific, and you just need like a reminder, or like a quick 10-minute tutorial or something, and not necessarily like a history on something and a lot of fluff stories to make it interesting. It's kind of like when you go, you get a recipe online and you have to read through, the story, the backstory of, Grandma used to make this, and this is the feeling of, coming inside after a long day in the rainy Northeast. It's like, no, just give me the recipe. And obviously I don't read any of that stuff anyway, and that's kind of how I felt with some YouTube channels specifically for art, And there's a place that there are definitely channels that I watch that have longer form content that is great. I would say, Proco and the Draftsman podcast. Like, I really enjoy their perspective on things, but you have to take it for what it is. It is a conversation about art, and then for Proco specifically, those are things that you can take in practice, and so the time commitment on those is fairly long. And so anyway, I had thought that a quick kind of short form art, not podcast, but just quick tutorials, quick snippets, would be something I'd like to do. But then obviously I might not be the guy for that, just given how long these things take and how much I like to talk. Like, if there's a concept that could be said in 12 words or less, I'm gonna take 50. I just have to acknowledge it. That's who I am. I am what I am. So as much as I like that idea, I think that it would be useful. I don't know if that's my specialty, right? So anyway, yeah, I think there are things that I could do to improve. But yeah, I appreciate you saying that, and I'm glad that you enjoy the content. One of the big things I would say is that I don't make any promises, and that can be a showstopper, I guess, for someone coming to the channel wondering what it's about, and if it's different every time, different content, and there's no, like, other than the date that that it's always going to be done Wednesday nights. There isn't a steady promise of this is what you're going to get and when, and you know, stay tuned to the end because that's what you'll get, right? I think there's a part of me that just wants to be honest and say that was never my intent, and that's not what I'm gonna that's not what I'm gonna do. Though I do see that as something that would be, you know, from a listener's perspective, I think would be desirable. Okay, I'll stop analyzing the stream and get back to the painting, right? Because that is the only promise I've made. I'll paint stuff. All right. I think these I want to make a little bit smaller than, you know, right here, so that it shows that those are farther back in space. Okay, I think we can zoom out now. That'd be a great idea. And we're talking about this one right here. What does this need? I think it needs some green down in here. A little closer to that shadow color. And maybe some green leading in. We'll go a little brighter with this. Again, with those diagonals. And, you know, maybe a good idea with these thumbnails would be to maybe spend more time trying different solutions rather than different angles on the same solution. You know, I keep talking about those diagonals, and like I was saying earlier, there is something about you know, you see something in the work, and or you see something in the subject, and that's what you want to accentuate in the work. And you know, I'm kind of feeling that. I think those diagonals are. It's a theme I keep coming back to. Like that is interesting to me, and so. Perhaps that is the perhaps that's the takeaway that I'm getting out of it. I'll fade this color in a little better there. Localize it a little more so it's not you know, just this huge mass. Should probably return to my reference a little bit here, so I'm not completely lost in the weeds. What is it with this guy getting lost in the weeds? Get lost somewhere else. Dad jokes. You know, it's getting late. The filter stops working. Dad jokes start coming out. Okay. Let's do a quick color pass on this. Color balance, we'll pin it to that group. And I think we should probably bring this to a close. I feel like I might have enough energy to do one more. But it has already been 2 hours, and I don't imagine that we'll be getting to any final image tonight. It might be something to pick up for a different time. It's actually kind of funny. You know, sometimes you do a color balance and you land somewhere that's very similar to where you started, and that's not a terrible problem to have. I think with some of these we could go a little crazier. So one thing that you can do is, well, first of all, I'm going to clean up these edges here. But yeah, one thing that you could do is do a fill layer and you know, set the blend mode on that. So then instead of it going through with what would this look like vertically? You know, like this. Sorry, buffering. My brain is buffering. We'll do that. We'll do that fill layer here in just a second. Okay. Right. So we've got our color balance. We could go image, layer, new fill, solid color. You pick your color, whatever you want it to be. We're going to pin it. I guess we got to accept the color first. Pin it down there. And then we change the blend modes on this. So overlay would be kind of the standard, you know, easy one to work with. This one's kind of interesting. If we go with linear light, then we can really blow out the whole thing, and we can play with this. So if you really want to end up in a different territory, you know, color-wise, this is a method that you can work with. And the nice thing with this too, especially, you know, the typical way to use it is to go overlay. And the reason for this, I'll explain real quick, is that it's easier to control. So if you stay in this middle gray down to 128, like right there. So hit OK, and then if I hide this, bring it back, so you can see nothing's really happening. And that's because overlay, if you're above middle gray, it's going to, you know, intensify those colors, and if you're below middle gray, it's going to darken those colors. So if I go just white, you see intensity, and then dark, you can see it, it intensifies, and it's going to go based on obviously the color below it. So if you have a darker color below it and you're going dark with your color, it's going to have a greater effect on the darker areas than on the light. Same thing in reverse with your bright colors. So now you know that middle gray is going to have no effect, and so you go up or down for middle gray, and then you could bring in your hue, you know, the saturation, as you come in with your saturation and shift your hue here, then you're introducing color. And so this is a pretty easy way to conceptualize what you're going to do to the image when you have it set in overlay and you're just color picking here. So if you look at your image and you say, okay, I think, you know, I like this, but I want it to be warmer, and maybe a little bit darker in the shadow areas. So, you know, you go into your orange tones, you go down, and you go over, and, you know, it's an easy way to conceptualize what's going to happen. Now, this is, I think, more useful when you combine it with the blend if feature. You know, so you could decide, all right, I like this, but I don't like what it's doing, you know, in my brights or something. And hopefully we won't crash this, but we'll go double click here, and then just take our lights and move it over, right? So maybe we do like that orange, but we only want it in the shadows, right? So that would be a way to isolate it. And then we can do the same thing again, you know, so now that we've isolated it to that zone, now we can, you know, shift this around and decide, you know, what we like. Maybe we like something in this teal region, you know. And then of course you can do the opposite. So you duplicate that, bring that in. This one, we'll just set it to red so that we can see what's happening. And then this one we'll do the opposite. We'll go anything above that value, right? So like in there. So now you can adjust your color palette really easily, and even, you know, the intensity of these lights, right? So if you wanted to darken it, brighten it, intensify the saturation, and, you know, obviously looking at this, it's easy to go overboard with it, but this is a method where instead of, you know, adjusting some sliders with a color balance or a curves layer, and those are legitimate ways to do it, but this is just a different way to conceptualize it that might be easier. So that's what we were working with originally, and now that we've been playing with those colors, you know, it's kind of interesting to see what you could do, you know, to shift the image around. You know, this, for example, it might just do that, but then just lower the opacity so that it has a little bit of an effect there, and then bring in these warms, and maybe we shift this altogether, you know. That kind of flattens out the image a little bit there, but I do like the you know, shifting that more towards those greens. Anyway, it's not something that you have to stick with if you don't like it, but these are some other methods, other ways to adjust your colors. This actually, I might go, you know, after doing that, I might come in with a curves layer, bring that up. So if we go curves, pin that down, you get a big spike right there. You know, so a lot of that color is in that zone. So I'm going to push those blacks down a little bit, bring in the saturation in the midtones, and then let's see what we want to do with the brights. Do we want to go all the way up to white and do a full, you know, the whole color spectrum, value spectrum, or do we want to do a high key or low key image, right? I think we're going to end up pretty much in high key or full spectrum, given that we have white as our focal point. There we go. You know, so I think I've pretty well described how that works. You can use this combination to end up in a completely different place. And you know, you can bring them in, bring them out, see how it see how you like it. Kind of like that, you know, much more intense brights, you know, when we take this overlay layer out. Maybe bring this back just a skosh, so we're not all the way up to white. Okay, I think that's a decent place to stop. So obviously I had much more reference to work with, but there's only so much time in the day. This is one that I'll very likely be coming back to because I just love this location. It's just so interesting. Let me just catch up on the chat before we wrap it up tonight. The teal colors are very nice. This method is much more powerful than the auto options for sure. Yeah, it's helpful, I think, to have different ways of conceptualizing how you can adjust your colors. You know, for the longest time I did levels, and then I think I started breaking out levels into their various channels. I would do hue saturation layer and a levels layer. Levels to get my brightness, and hue saturation to, you know, to shift my hue and saturation, obviously. And then at some point I figured out that you could select each, you could select a color range in the hue saturation, so then that gave me more freedom. And then my sister-in-law, who works in photography, she recommended this overlay method. I started using color balance, gradient maps. I don't use gradient maps very much, but the more options you have to adjust your colors and get things dialed in, you know, it frees you up. Partly you don't have to fight with something so much, but also it lets you do it in the way that you prefer to conceptualize color, or prefer to conceptualize the value in your scene. You know, I find curves to be very useful. It can get wild, and in some cases, you know, early on it was difficult for me to figure out exactly what effect I was having. But you know, once you get into it and you look at it and you see, oh, this is actually really intuitive. You know, it's showing me where on the spectrum, on the histogram, my values lie, and then I can just kind of push them up, push them down. You know, and so I think that different ways of conceptualizing and modeling, analyzing what you have going on in your scene, it's just valuable. You know, it's just one more tool in your toolbox. So, all right, I think this will wrap it up for tonight. I'm going to zoom in on each one of these before we're done, so we can kind of see what we did. This is the one we started with, though we had a much rougher version starting out. And then obviously we came back and adjusted that. Our second composition here, I like how the clouds there's no edge here between the clouds in the midground and the cloud and sky in the background. There's something about that is just really pleasing to me, that these are just graphic shapes, and this is all just one big graphic shape that, you know, has a gradation down. I like the simplicity of that. This one in high key, and this is something that I need to practice more of. I almost always default to a full spectrum from black to white and everything in between, and I think I need to be more mindful of where my values group, and utilizing high and low key imagery depending on the subject matter, how that better tells the story. I kind of came from the school of thought that full spectrum was best, because it's just it kind of comes back to that whole like candy analogy. It's just like you get the full, all the flavors all at once, and it hits you, and it has that nice pop. But art is subjective in many ways, and that full spectrum might work for certain things, but I think having a more nuanced and careful approach to what value I'm using, the color relationships, where they lie, next to each other on the canvas, and where each graphic shape kind of rests, or where it falls in the value hierarchy. That's something that I'm starting to be more mindful of. You would think, this far into it, I would know what I'm doing, but I definitely see that as something that I could use improvement on. And then this last image, where I spent quite a bit more time on the rocks, to get that those vertical stripes and then these diagonals, and everything's kind of coming into this area. And again, this subject was it lends itself to a focal point. It's frankly, what I was saying earlier about who would build this thing and bring all these materials up there and paint it this way, and all the kind of visual interest and stuff. It's like, well, it was designed to be a focal point. It's designed to be this shining bright. It's almost out of place, like just how high up in the mountain it is. And I would imagine if you're walking through that region, you couldn't miss it. If you caught a glimmer of that white, so it's designed that way. It's designed to be, flashy and draw the eye in, and then all of these other portions of the stone pattern, and the diagonals and everything. It's just, you can't go wrong with it. It has all of the ingredients to a visually interesting focal point. So, yeah, this particular one was a lot of fun, and like I said, I'll be revisiting this one. I'm going to wrap it up here. So, thank you for joining in tonight, and like always, I hope you had your own project going on the side and made some headway on it. I will be, I plan to be here doing this again next week, and let's see, as far as things going on, I've debated this. I haven't made any promises yet, but I've been looking at those kind of aspects that I was talking about, areas where I know I need improvement, and perhaps setting up a separate time, not on the Wednesday night, but a separate stream. Not sure whether I want to stream it or just do it, like in full hermit mode. But that is something that I'm contemplating. So if that's interesting to anyone, let me know, in the comments, to have a separate time, a separate stream that has a specific topic, week to week, that I'm practicing to improve. And I'll bring in specific exercises and just, set that time aside to do those exercises. So if that interests you, let me know in the comments. And otherwise, we'll just be here again next week. And that's it. All right. Thanks for joining in tonight, and have a good night.